Hi everybody, Brett from Westcon here. In this video I'm going to demonstrate how to create a simple virtual private cloud using the Amazon Management Console. So you can see I've gone ahead and logged into my AWS account already, and I've selected the Northern California region up in the top right hand corner. Before actually creating our VPCs, always know that a VPC is a regional service. So when you're creating VPCs for yourself or for customers, you want to make sure that you're in the correct region before deploying the VPC. So make sure you select, you can just click this for the drop down. I'm going to leave US West Northern California. I'm in the main window of the management console here, so I'm going to search for the VPC service and go ahead and click that to bring it up. So here's the management console for the virtual private cloud service. You can see I already have a VPC created. If we dig into this a little bit, you can see it's just an unnamed VPC. Every region that exists within your AWS account will have what's called a default VPC. You can see the default VPCs by looking at the columns of information here, and if you look to the far right, you'll see default VPC is set to yes. My recommendation is to never use the default VPC. We'll get to why in a second. So what I normally do is I create a name tag and I just call it default, do not use, okay? So if I click save, now you'll see that updated. The reason that I don't like to use the default VPC is that it's the same across every region, and what we want to make sure that we do here is create unique VPCs that are customized for specific use cases internal to our organization or for customers. If we use the default VPC, that doesn't give us as much flexibility, I feel, to deploy solutions for customers. So mark it as default, do not use it. I would also recommend that you do not delete it. The services that are VPC aware, they may start to act a little abnormal if you delete the default VPC. And once you delete the default VPC, you can't recreate it yourself. You have to open a support ticket with AWS and they can recreate it. So I would recommend that you just mark it as default, do not use, and leave it at that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create my first VPC. We're not going to use the VPC wizard to do this. By doing this manually, you get to see more of the information about how to do this. So we're going to go ahead and click Create VPC. And I'm just going to give it a name, Demo VPC. The only piece of information that we really need to provide is the CIDR block, the network address range that we want to use for the VPC. The largest range you can create is a /16, which would give us 16,000 IP addresses, and the smallest is a /28, which I think gives us about 20 addresses. It's very small. I'm going to use the /16 for this example. You would want to discuss this internally and with your clients to make sure it's the correct CIDR block for your purposes. The one thing I'll point out here is that you want to make sure there is no overlap of networks, either inside AWS or externally to AWS if you're going to connect a VPC back to a customer's environment or your own environment for a hybrid sort of deployment scenario. So just make sure there's no overlap and then select the most appropriate CIDR block for what it is that you're going to do. We're not going to create any IPv6 CIDR blocks, and we're going to leave the tenancy as default. You can do, if you drop this list down, you can see dedicated. In this case, we don't have any reason to have a dedicated VPC, so we're going to manage our costs here and leave it as default. So we're going to click Create. And now we have our demo VPC. The first thing I'm going to do is we've created this virtual private cloud and it is completely isolated in every way. So we're going to connect our VPC for this demo to the internet. In order to do that, we're going to deploy what's called an internet gateway. So I'm going to click Internet Gateway here and I'm going to say Create Gateway. I'm going to give it a name. So I'm just going to say Demo VPC Internet Gateway and click Create. Now you can see that I have a new internet gateway created that's in detached state. So we're going to attach it to a VPC. We're going to just make sure here that we've selected the correct VPC and say attach. So at this point now, our VPC, in theory, has access to the internet. I'm going to now go ahead and filter by VPC. This will keep just the console a little cleaner for us as we're going through this. So click Demo VPC, and you can see now we're only going to see resources associated with the VPC that we're creating. Now that we have our virtual private cloud created and we've connected it to the internet, we have to subdivide it or segment it into individual subnets where we can place our resources. Best practice, AWS will tell you that we have to build for failure here, so we want to deploy across 2 availability zones, or AZs, on the Amazon platform. Virtual private clouds themselves span entire regions. Subnets are tied to specific availability zones. So in order to build out a highly available VPC, what we're going to do is we're going to create a total of 4 subnets, 2 public and 2 private, and we will make sure 1 public and 1 private are in a single AZ, and the other public and private subnets are in another AZ. So this gives us the ability to distribute our infrastructure across multiple availability zones and be able to survive a failure inside Amazon, or if something goes wrong with our application. So I'm going to click subnets, and I'm going to go ahead and create my first subnet. So I'm going to create a public subnet, and we're going to make sure again that we select the correct VPC. You also want to define the availability zone. If you don't do this, Amazon will select one for you. So we want to make sure that we spread our infrastructure across 2 AZs. So we're going to select B, and we're going to make this a /24. Another thing that I'd like to point out here is be very careful when you subdivide your VPCs. You probably do not want to follow the example here. We're going to keep it simple by subdividing in just /24s, but you would want to talk to your customer or talk to your internal business client and make sure that you are actually subdividing your network in the most appropriate way. Typically, you would want very small public subnets and very large private subnets, but just to keep the math easy here, we're going to use /24s. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create, and that'll create our first public subnet. There it is. So now I'm going to go ahead and create the second public subnet. Make sure we're using the right VPC. In this case, we want to use 1C to make sure it's in the different availability zone, and we're going to make it 20.0/24. So there are our 2 public subnets created. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and create 2 private subnets. So private subnet 1, again, check your VPC. Subnet 1 is in B, so we're going to go ahead and define the subnet. And then create our 4th subnet. VPC, right availability zone. And then, oops, there we go. So now we have our 4 subnets, 2 public and 2 private. Just so that you know, the only difference between public subnets and private subnets is their default route. So public subnets have a default route that points at the internet gateway. Private subnets, they would have a default route that points to something other than the internet gateway. Could be a NAT instance, a NAT gateway, a jump box, whatever it might be. For the purposes of demonstrations today, we are going to create NAT gateways. NAT gateways are managed services that are provided to us by Amazon, so they are highly available within the availability zone where we deploy them. So we're able to offload work to Amazon. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how to create a NAT gateway and a couple things that you have to be aware of. So we're going to click NAT gateways down here. And it's very simple to create a NAT gateway. All we have to do is tell it what subnet we want to deploy it in. So in this case, our public subnet. So we're going to create public subnet 1. And we have to assign an elastic IP or an EIP. This is a NAT gateway, so it has to have a publicly accessible IP address. We're going to just create a new IP. Amazon will do that on our behalf, and we click Create NAT Gateway. Now, one of the things that you want to do when you're doing this, take a minute for it to show up, there we go, is write down some identifying information about the NAT gateway. So I'm just going to take the last 4 characters, so E048, and we know that's in subnet, public subnet 1. Okay, and I'll show you in a minute why that's important. So I'm going to create a second NAT gateway that exists in our second availability zone, so in this case public subnet 2. Do like I did before and just assign a new elastic IP to it, and go ahead and click Create, And there's our second machine coming up, and I'm going to jot down the last 4 digits of that too. So C05A. C05A is in subnet 2, or sorry, is in availability zone 2. So I just made a quick note of those so I can differentiate them later on. So now we have our subnets created, our NAT gateways, and our internet gateway. What we can do is create our route tables. So best practice here is to create an individual route table for every subnet. But you can see when we created our VPC, we got a default route table. We are not going to use this, so just like we did before, I'm going to go ahead and change this to default route table. Do not use. Okay. So just to make it stand out. So we're going to go ahead and create all of the route tables that we need. So public route table 1. And again, we have to be very careful here that we select the correct VPC. So I'm going to go ahead and create all 4 of our route tables now. Okay, public route table 2. So there's our 2 public route tables created. We'll go ahead and create our 2 private route tables. Again, being careful about the VPC. And create our final one. Okay, so now that we have our route tables created, we have 4 new route tables, 1 for every subnet that we've created, and the default route table that we're not going to use. Now we have to actually configure the route tables. So I'm just going to sort here, and we're just going to go through in order. So I've selected public route table 1. The first thing that I need to do is create its default route. So if you're trying to go anywhere other than the VPC, go out through the internet gateway. Okay, I'm going to save that change. And now I also have to associate the subnet to the route table that we want it to use. So in this case, we're editing route table 1. So I'm going to associate it to public subnet 1. And now we've done the configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and select public route table 2 and do the same thing. Set up the default route and point it at the internet gateway. Save our change. And associate the correct subnet. Okay, so there's our 2 public subnets set up. Now I'm going to find private route table 1 and edit its route. Now, as I mentioned, the only difference between a private route table and a private subnet and a public subnet is the default route. So in this case, I want to associate private route table 1 with the NAT gateway that we deployed in the same availability zone. So I wrote that down earlier. It's E048, and I'm going to save that. And just like we did for the public subnets, we have to associate our private subnets. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then finally, private route table 2, adjust the default route to point at the NAT gateway in its availability zone, which we know is C05A. Save that change, and then associate our final subnet, private subnet 2. So there you have it. We've created our first VPC, defined its network range, created subnets that span, in this case, 2 availability zones, 2 public and 2 private. We've created an internet gateway to connect our VPC to the public internet. We've created 2 NAT gateways, 1 in each availability zone to promote high availability for our deployment. And then we've created 4 route tables, 1 for every subnet. And we've updated the default routes for each of those subnets to point to their default route. So remember, public subnets point to the internet gateways, private subnets point to, in our case, a NAT gateway in their availability zone. So thank you very much for watching. That wraps up our demo here on creating a very simple virtual private cloud.